Welcome to the Expanded Podcast with your host, Lacey Phillips. As a leading manifestation advisor with a process that's, radically different from the old New Age model, mine is rooted in psychology, neuroscience, and my energetic gifts. I created this podcast to help you expand your subconscious limiting beliefs about the potential of deserving the manifestations you're calling in. Therefore, you're tuning into this podcast series to show your subconscious that anything you desire is possible. And by pressing play, you've already started the process of manifesting it. If you enjoy this episode, please leave us a review, comment, and share it with your fellow manifester that's struggling or could really benefit from the information that you're about to learn. Welcome back this week. Man, how have the eclipses, I think we just hit our second this last week, been affecting you guys? I mean, for me, it's actually been really amazing. They're really asking me to up level and showing me very clearly how I need to do that. For instance, I did all of the next level workshop within Up Level on Sunday night in order to prime for the new roadmap that we're working through this month, which is revisiting the foundational workshops. I think it's a really important time to do it mid-year and right before the new year. And if you're like, what are the roadmaps? Go ahead and check the link below. You will catch it. It's free. It's how we are all as a group navigating the workshops within the pathway this month together. What is new? Something interesting that downloaded last weekend. It's actually been simmering a little bit. I get a lot of channeling often about new things about this work, and I didn't really know what platform to stick them on or where. However, I see people doing all of this IGTV stuff, and it just made the most sense the moment something comes through like a lightning bolt to just pick up the phone and share it with you guys on Instagram. And so I did that for the first time last Saturday. We'll have it linked below here. It's a really good channeling about when you aren't passing tests or you feel like you've failed a test, how to instantly neutralize that test energy to get back into your magnetism. And so I asked you if you wanted me to continue that, and it was a resounding yes. I think almost 400 comments of yes. So go ahead and tune into those. They come through often, and I'm just going to start doing them in the moment. Otherwise, there's actually a product I want to tell you about, and this isn't sponsored. I'm not selling anything. It dawned on me I should share this with another person who might suffer from sunspots. I'm that fair skin that gets hyperpigmentation, and I'm the one who's tried laser and all of these things. And it was actually, I used to use the product Evan Healy for years. And last year we sat down with them as a team and they walked us through their whole line. And I remember specifically one of the reps telling us that, who's I think well into her 40s, that she's used their rose hip serum daily. And all of her friends always comment that she doesn't have sunspots because apparently rose hips breaks up the pigmentation and evens out your face. And I was like, oh, whatever, I've tried everything, but I'll try it. And I will say I've been using it consecutively at night. I cleanse my face with their cleanser. I use literally their Hydrosol, and then I'll put the rose hip only. And I use actually their shea butter lips on my eyes and my lips. And that's all I do for the night. And again, this totally is not paid or sponsorship. I just want to share it. And I looked in the mirror, I think it was 2 days ago, and I noticed all of my sunspots or whatever they were, they're totally gone. And it's happened so strategically and slowly that I just now noticed. But for another person out there who might be struggling with that, I wanted to let you know about that because I'm not really doing my Friday. Well, we're going to maybe start the Friday roundups again on the blog. So I was like, I want to, I'm that type of person that's like, I want to share with everybody. They should know, cool stuff. Apparently there's this other cool product that I might be late to the party on that A friend of mine who's a makeup artist told me about the Squalane phytoretinol serum. I guess it's like the chat about town and holistic beauty right now. Again, totally not sponsored or paid. I actually don't even own it. I am about to buy it, but apparently it's the alternative to retinol serums. It's completely plant-based with no retinol in it, but equally as effective. And I used to use that as well because you'll ask any woman who's aged really well, and men, I imagine, what they did. And they're all like, oh, I used Retin-A and retinol. And so I used it for years. And then all of my holistic go-to people like Brita Beauty and Nadine Artemis said it's dreadful for the microbiome on the surface of the skin and all of that. But this seems to be a really good alternative. So I'm picking that up. And another thing I've been stumbling into lately, which I think everybody here knows I'm pretty obsessed with Scotland. And I was Googling the other night, traditional Scottish diet. And this great cookbook came up, which we'll link below. And it's all of the really traditional food. And I realized that most of what my body craves happens to be their food. And so I bought the cookbook. I'm actually really excited for it to arrive in the mail right before my guests arrive for the 4th of July so that I can prepare some of that food. But they really do have some of the most amazing staple superfoods that originate from there, like seaweed and salmon and oats. Like that's a huge thing. They're steel cut oats that they've used forever, and they're wild berries. And anyways, that's the other highlight going on. And then otherwise, in terms of the Topanga House, we're really excited. We're a week out from it closing. We're not totally holding our breath just in case anything goes awry. The seller realtor's just been really bullying and shady that it wouldn't surprise me if something crazy happened in the end. So we're just letting that go the way it goes. And if anything does fall out or doesn't work out, of course, I believe in manifestation. So I know the next best thing is on its way. And I think that's all for my updates, really, for the most part of what I've been super into. And then again, we're bringing back that Friday roundup, I think, for other tidbits you might like to learn about. Today's episode's really exciting. I'm so impressed with this woman. Let's just totally properly introduce her. She's a diversity expert. She's an advocate and she's an activist. Her name is Patricia Coulter. And it's a really powerful episode because she's our wisest guest so far. She's 73 years old and she walks us through her really inspiring story. And she's so beautiful about it. You know, I think she mentioned that she had 4 or 5 planets in Aquarius during the episode. And I love that because I find that people with predominantly Aquarian charts are able to emotionally disconnect from situations and see them very clearly. Not to say that that's what happened with her, but she just is such a beautiful storyteller in such an inspiring way. And I love that about her. So some of her highlights is she was the only Black woman in her workplace, and then she moved into empowering urban communities. She was the first of her family to get her college degree. That was really important to her parents. She gives us an incredible view on diversity issues we're facing in America now. We also discuss her experience with the civil rights movement, her progression into a corporate career, and how to manage white privilege today, which she was so generous and really beautiful and open about discussing with me. I think this episode's really expansive for so many in every community, including activists, people of color, single mothers, anyone, women in the corporate space, male, female. I think all of us will really learn and take away a lot from this episode. So welcome, Patricia. Let's start with the question I ask everybody is tell me about your cultural upbringing and background.
Okay, so cultural background. I was born and partly raised in the South, in North Carolina. Very small town in North Carolina called Newton, North Carolina. And my family moved there or left there, I should say, in 1958 when I was 12 years old. My dad decided to Well, he actually decided, he and my mom, that they needed to kind of get out of the South and get someplace that would be more economically, um, I guess, better, if I could use that word, because there were so many limitations in the South, particularly with Jim Crow and all that that was happening, during that time. So we moved, we migrated actually, and you've probably heard of the Great Migration of blacks. 5 to 6 million blacks leaving the South between, I think, 1910 and 1970. So we were part of that. That my family was part of that, and we moved to the Midwest, to Cleveland. There had been some of my mother's brothers who had already gone to Cleveland and had found work, pretty good jobs. So they said to my dad, you need to come on out here, and, you can find a job. At that time, there were 3 children. I'm the oldest of 4. And so by the time we left North Carolina, I was 12. I had a sister that was 5, and then a baby brother who was, I guess, 2 at the time. So we moved from Newton, North Carolina to Cleveland, Ohio. Now, for me personally, this was kind of like, Dad, is this a good time to move? I'm just right about to become a teenager, and you sort of feel like, oh, everything is going wrong anyway, and look at me and this and that, and nothing was right. So I moved there, and coming from a very small town to a city like Cleveland, that is considered to be a major metropolitan city, it felt so overwhelming. It was like, it was good and bad at the same time. It was good because I loved the energy of it, like seeing so many people, and cars everywhere and stores everywhere, and it was kind of like, wow. But at the same time, it was somewhat intimidating, because the one thing I remember about my teenage experience then was that I had this deep Southern accent. And so the kids were like, "Where is she from? Where is that? What is that? What is that? Why you talk like that?" And so that became, I think, part of what helped me build my confidence, because I knew that it was okay to have an accent, but I didn't want to make it something where I became standoffish or didn't fit in or what have you. So I focused on academics, which had been what I had done even in my early years. And I had, my parents had, even before we left North Carolina, had started giving me piano lessons, or getting me to have piano lessons. So I was learning how to play the piano. And this was great. And my parents had bought a piano, which back in that day was a pretty expensive thing to do. And so when we got to Cleveland, it became an outlet for me that I was doing something a little different than most of the kids at school, because I was taking piano lessons. And so I continued to play the piano. My parents, most of my family, very steeped in faith and religion. And so I played a lot of my piano for the church. I played for programs, a couple of the choirs, so it was a way for me to really get my chops, so to speak, on playing the piano. Well, then when I was about to graduate from high school, it was college facing us. Well, let me back up, because also in Cleveland, then I had the final sibling was born. George is his name, and he was the baby. So he was the only one of the 4 that was born in Cleveland. And at that point, my mom and dad were really focused on sending the 4 of us to college. It became their life's goal, was we have to educate these 4 kids, and we want them to go to college. We want them to finish college so that they can be on their own. So as I started to get closer to being a graduating senior, it was like, well, you're going to college. Now it's just a matter of where you're going to go and what can we afford and all of that. And then I started thinking about, well, gosh, what will I major in? And, like, what are all these things? Because I hadn't really thought about it that much. And I said, well, I can always be a teacher because even when I was growing up in North Carolina, the people that I admired were my teachers. I had several of them were women teachers. I think I only had really two male teachers that I can remember. The male teachers, one was my piano teacher, and then the other one was my sixth grade teacher who was really mean, and I didn't like him very much. But the women I admired, and they were beautiful, they were knowledgeable, they seemed to have a lot of confidence, and I think in some way I saw myself, in them. So I thought, well, I'll be a teacher. Now the cost of college became a big deal because it's like, how are we going to do this? My parents had just bought a house in Cleveland, and so now it's like we're going to have a mortgage plus a college note. So my high school choral teacher, I was part of the choir in high school. He said to me one day, he used to call me Coltrane. Mm-hmm. This was the era of John Coltrane and jazz. I'm a jazz aficionado. I love jazz. So he says, Coltrane, I want to talk to you about something. He says, have you ever heard of Knoxville College? And I said, I've heard of Knoxville, the city, which is in Tennessee, but no, not Knoxville College. So he explains that it's a small Presbyterian school, a black college, which today we know as historically black colleges and universities, in Knoxville, Tennessee. And he said the concert choir is coming to Cleveland. They do this annual tour, and they're coming to Cleveland, and the director is the head of the music department. He said, I want you to audition for him because you might be able to get a scholarship to that school. Well, of course, I never thought I was that good, and I thought, are you a scholarship? No way. He's like, no, don't worry. He says, just come up with a piece that you want to play, get prepared for it. And he said, I'll arrange for you to get with him. And so he did, and I followed through and I played my piece. I didn't feel like it went that well, but the outcome was that I got a 4-year scholarship to Knoxville College.
Oh my gosh.
So I tell my parents, and they were ecstatic, and I was elated. Okay, I'm going to college. And guess what? I'm majoring in music. That was going to be my major. So Knoxville, I'll never forget this because my parents, this is 1964. Mm-hmm. My parents, we had a station wagon. They drove me from Cleveland to Knoxville, this long trip to Knoxville. I packed everything I had in a trunk, like a Foot Locker trunk. And they dropped me off at the college. My dad took my trunk to my room, and they gave me hugs and probably $10 and said, all right, we'll see you at Christmas. We'll see you at Christmas. So I was like, okay, I guess, And at that point, it sort of became, all right, you're here. Let's see what this is about. Right. And I think, when I think culturally, I guess I've always kind of been a person that's been curious about new things. I also, from a personality perspective, I like meeting people. So I even, going to Cleveland and the kids and the Southern accent and all that, it didn't deter me from making friends, right? And so the same thing in college. It was like, okay, I'm here and all these new people and wow. I had a roommate. My roommate was also from Cleveland, so I knew her. But other than that, I didn't know anyone else. So that experience, as I look back on it now, has kind of also been the way I guess I've lived my life when it comes to interactions and meeting people and being curious about new things. But I would say that my parents were working class. I was the first to go to college, but all of my siblings did go and complete college.
And you were the first in your family?
Yes, first in my family to go to college. I had a few cousins that had gone ahead of me, but within my immediate family, I was the first. And then my sister followed. She went to Ohio University and graduated, and my brother, first brother, went to University of Cincinnati. He's an engineer, and then my baby brother also went to Ohio University. So they all went to college and completed college.
Excellent.
Which was my parents' dream, right? And then we all, I guess there was a sort of unspoken rule during those times, which was you go to college, you get a degree, and then you go forth, you go out. Mm-hmm. You know, that's what's expected. Now, for me personally, that was great because I didn't ever see myself coming back to Cleveland, right? It's like I knew there was a bigger world. There were other things I wanted to do. Cleveland was fine. My family was there, so of course I loved it for that. But I hated the winters. It's like a Chicago winter, if you've never been there.
Oh, how
like
cold.
Cold, dreary all the time, below zero. I mean, just agonizing cold, snow, up to here all the time. And so I knew that the weather was not something that I wanted to be immersed in. So I thought, great, go to college, and then I can decide where I'm going to go after that. So I did. I finished college. Of course, then the challenge is a job. And even at that time, we had recruiters who would come on campus and interview us, for potential jobs. So in 1968, I was interviewed by this gentleman out of Atlanta, Georgia, actually DeKalb County school system in Decatur, Georgia. And he thought I would make a great music teacher. He was going to submit all of my paperwork and, see what happens. So I got a letter. They'd love to have me. My starting date is this particular time or whatever. We welcome you to DeKalb County. My school was, I forget, Henderson Elementary School, whatever. So I thought, wow, this is it. This is the big step. I can leave home. I have a place to go, and I have a job. So I moved to Atlanta. My dad, so this is to give a sense of what I mean by working class. So my dad and mom gave me my first car out of college. However, it wasn't a total gift. They paid a $500 down payment on the car for me, and then I had to make the rest of the payments for 3 years, I think it was. So, but I was so grateful. I had a car, and my dad, his profession was auto body repair, not the mechanic side, but the repair of the vehicles. And back then, the cars were made out of metal and, not all this fiberglass and whatever they're made out of today. So he was actually brilliant. He was an artist in that regard. So my first car was a 1968 Camaro.
Oh, wow. They got you that?
They got me that.
Not only did you have a car, you were like the most styling person.
I was. And then my dad, it was a nice, like rust type color. And my dad painted me some stripes around the side.
Would I give to have that car now?
Oh, I was so happy. So I had my car. So I had a car. I had a job and I had a place to go to. And in Atlanta, I connected with a person who, to this day, is one of my very best friends who also left the same school and went to Atlanta, had a job. And then we lived with another couple that we knew out of our school who had also moved to Atlanta. And he and I were teaching in the same school district. So we lived with them for probably the first 6 months till we could get some paychecks and come up with enough money to put a down payment on an apartment. And then Sharon and I, that's her name, we moved out and found our own place. So that was like the beginning. And the first day that I walked into the school, this was 1968. I had my hair has been natural since probably 1967.
I was gonna say,
And by
paint us
that,
a picture.
yeah,
I want like
I want that I
Atlanta,
look like.
you, 68. Like, give us a picture of what all that was
Okay,
like.
so I guess, I mean, I look at it now, people would probably say I was somewhat like a rebel in a sense, but I wasn't crazy rebel, because I knew my parents would kill me if I did
Yeah, yeah.
anything really,
I should
outlandish.
interject for a moment and say she's an Aquarius. And people
There you
love
go.
to know on
Yes,
the
there you go.
podcast.
So that curiosity, and so we were very much into the civil rights movement, from 64 to 68, which was the period that I was in college. So I was following all the stuff that was happening, following what was going on with Black Panthers, following, that was all part of sort of forming, who I would be as I kind of grew up, so to speak. And one of the things that I remember so distinctly about the civil rights movement was I will always have a certain feeling, I guess, of emotion on April 4th, which is the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated, because the concert choir in Knoxville College, we were on tour. Like when I was auditioned by the director, they were on tour. So every year we would travel to several different cities and states to raise money for the college. And this year, 1968, we were on tour. We were in Cincinnati, Ohio on April 4th. Of course, without any of the electronic media and knowing what was going on in the world, we did not learn of Dr. King's death until right before the concert. So we all assemble, and to also paint this picture, our audience, we were sponsored by the Presbyterian Church. And so our audience was primarily white, with a sprinkling of graduates of Knoxville College who lived in Cincinnati, right? So we go in to warm up and do our little rehearsal before the concert, and we are told about the shooting of MLK, his assassination. So emotion was very high, very high. As we started to perform, it was probably our best concert ever. I wish we had recorded that one because it was so good. But the emotion from our conductor and the emotion from those of us singing, it was just a night of tears. And but for whatever reason, our voices were, it seemed to be just a magnificent moment. It almost didn't feel real. So we of course, that was over. We traveled back to school, but it was an indelible mark that something has happened here relating to civil rights. And so even our campus had some uproar with police and, picketers. After all, this was Tennessee, where we were. But we all remained safe. There was one incident where there was a fight broke out. The police came on the campus. I think they were rushing the people or whatever, and a policeman was shot. As it turned out, the policeman was shot by someone who was not a Knoxville College student. But at the time, we didn't know that, and they didn't know that. And so they basically had us on lockdown, or, so it was just kind of a very
deep tension,
tumultuous,
Oh, yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And that was right before our graduations, like April. I'm graduating in May, right? So we finish. I moved to Atlanta, and we move forward from that. But my look was one of, I decided to stop. At then it was what you call hot irons or something, and we used to straighten our hair. And I always hated that from the time I was a little girl, because my mother would straighten my hair, and it seems like with everyone, my ear or my neck
something got burned.
Something got burned,
Yeah.
and I was always like with a scar here and that, and I hated it. I thought, why am I going through this? So then, one of my favorite aunts became a beautician in Cleveland, and she ended up opening her own shop and was really very successful. And she loved doing hair, and she loved color. She was into color and all that. I remember before she opened her shop, she worked in the big department stores, because she learned to color on white women's hair first. And then she was able to transfer that skill or whatever to black women's hair. So she decided that I should have a perm, straighten my hair, and then I wouldn't have to worry about all these burns and everything. So I get a perm, and it did not take well. It did not. First of all, just the whole perm thing and the burning of the whatever. I was like, no. But my hair started to come out, And my hair was, then it was very thick and always more short than long, but it was very thick. So I said, okay, that's not the route. I can't do perms. And I thought, forget it. I'm just going to go natural. And so, of course, Angela Davis was one of my big heroes.
Oh, yeah.
I mentioned the Black Panthers earlier. And I thought, well, I probably can't be that, but I can be a little version of it.
What did it look like grown out? Because to paint you guys a picture right now, Patricia is so beautiful, and she has these stunning pronounced glasses on, short, natural gray hair, which is so beautiful.
Yes.
So what did it look like at its full natural?
So it was probably just a couple of inches around.
Oh, yeah.
And, back then everything was with a pick. So you would just have to pick it out, and it would just, you keep picking it out, and then it was a hand movement. Like you had to use your hand to flatten the edges, to make it kind of round, and really, I only had that probably for about 3 years, and then once I started working, I started cutting it down, making it shorter, really trying to make it more trim looking. After all, I was a professional teacher. But here's what I want to tell you about the teacher story. The first day I walk into my school, I walk in and I head to the teacher's lounge because they had coffee in there. Go in and meet the new teachers. And I walk in and I find out I'm the only black teacher in the school. So I thought, and now the way I found that out is that they were actually shocked to see me come and it was kind of like that when I walked in the room.
Stop it.
Honestly, it was like, so I knew something was up. I thought, oops, I'm not sure something's up. So I was gracious, hello, my name is Patricia Coulter, and I'm going to be the new music teacher, so they were gracious, and they, I'm so-and-so, I teach first grade, whatever. So then after a couple of days, after the first day, so I go to my classroom, start setting up. Then I find out there are no black kids in the school either. So I'm like, okay, now the guy didn't tell me this. Now, the man who interviewed me on the campus was now my principal, right? So he specifically hired me to work in his school. So I go to his office one day after work, after the day is over, and I said, I'm a little confused by this. I said, I'm happy to be here. It's a lovely place. The kids are fantastic. I said, but I never thought I would be the only African American, in the school. And he said, well, it doesn't matter. He said, I don't want you to think that it's um, a problem or that anything. He said, when we met, I felt compatible with you and I wanted you in my school. And he said, if there's ever a problem with a parent or a teacher or anyone disrespects you, I want you to feel comfortable coming to me. So I felt like he and I kind of had a thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? I was like, okay, all right, I'll try this. I still didn't quite like it, but it was okay. Because you have to remember my background, I had been educated in black schools.
Mm-hmm.
When I got to Cleveland, the school was integrated, but you still primarily, kind of hung out with the black kids. Then I went to a black college. So now I'm stepping into my first professional job, and it's a white arena for
Mm-hmm.
me. So I thought, well, obviously God put me here for a reason. So I'm the music teacher. So let's teach music. Now there's a curriculum that I was supposed to follow. I didn't quite. Um, I guess I didn't like the curriculum because it there was nothing about me and who I was and what I was bringing in the curriculum. The songs, it still had a very what we call really like a racist tone. It
Mm-hmm.
was a lot of very southern, like back in the day kinds of the southern songs, that people like to dance to or whatever and sing. And I thought, I'm not feeling this, right? I'm really not feeling this. So I decided to veer off from the curriculum and, teach the kids things that I thought they would like.
Mm-hmm.
So I did things like musicals for Broadway.
Oh,
And we
wow.
did those
Yeah.
types of songs, and they loved them, and they loved to sing them, and it was wonderful. And then I started doing like music appreciation, and I slipped in like a little jazz, and like people like Ella Fitzgerald, and listening to their voices, and they loved it. So anyway, I said to the principal, because so many of the kids were interested in singing and music, and they liked my class, and I said, I think I want to start like a little musical group, sort of like a little choral group or whatever. And he said, sure, fine. So started this group, and these were elementary kids, so I think my choral group was probably fifth and sixth graders, and so we started then singing all sorts of songs, right? And then I thought, well, gee, I think we'll do a concert. This is my my forte. So we put together a concert, and the kids sang Negro spirituals. They sang songs from Broadway hits like Oliver and West Side Story. It was like, and I'm trying to think there was another. Um, we sort of went a little bit on the gospel
Oh,
side,
I bet they
and I'm trying to
loved
think
it.
of who it was, but it wasn't the gospel we know today, but it was at least something that was new and different. But it got them sort of in the spirit of the music, and I let them clap. I had little tambourines, and so it was just, to me, music is fun, and it's something that you love because it does something to your spirit,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for kids at that age, I felt, why should they be solely held to a little green book with all these songs in it that nobody really likes?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I should be really honest. I didn't
Yeah,
like.
yeah, sure,
Okay.
sure.
When there's so much more to music. Well, that led me to um, not my principal, but the my supervisor in the district who oversaw all the music teachers. She came to visit me and do an on-site and and all that. And she really dinged me for not using and sticking to the curriculum. So then my principal had to call me in and have a conversation with me. He did say that as far as he was concerned, what I was doing was perfectly fine. That he had no complaints from parents, no complaints from students. He said, what you're doing is perfectly fine. So I just kept doing it, right?
Fantastic.
But what it led me to was, it led me to question, is this really where I want to be, right? And after 2 years, I decided it wasn't. I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew it wasn't that. And so I decided to go back to school. So I was able to get a fellowship to the University of Louisville. It was still in the area of education, but at the end of the fellowship, I would have my master's in education. Again, I wasn't sure that I really wanted to teach more, but at least at that time, which was 1970, it was 2 years of work, and then, so that was 1972 by the time I finished. But I knew that at least I had another degree, and I could leverage that into something else. So I moved to Louisville, Kentucky with another friend who also applied for the same program. We got a cute little apartment, and we worked during the day in the Louisville Public Schools, and then our classes were at night. So we did that for 2 years, met some great people in Louisville. I still have some wonderful friends there. And I went back to Atlanta after that, went back to the school system, same system, but different school. At that point, I was like a hybrid teacher. I taught some music, but also some fourth grade, right? And you have to also think of this this would have been 1972 when I returned. Now when I go to Atlanta and I look at what's happening there, it's almost like amazing to me, because in 1970s, early 70s and late 60s, there was the city of Atlanta, which is where we lived. But as you started to move out from the city of Atlanta, it was some scary territory.
Particularly, if you were to paint that picture,
yeah, so, scary in terms of Ku Klux Klan areas. Stone Mountain was known for, black people don't go there kind of thing, and it was a beautiful park. But you didn't veer outside of the city very much if you were black. So again, I was beginning to feel a little confined. I'm like, I like Atlanta, but I really don't like all this other stuff that's going on. I knew that it wasn't that it was that much different in the North or other places, but I knew that for me personally, my growth, I was feeling somewhat stymied with that. And maybe this is, again, sort of that Aquarian thing where, and I didn't tell you this, but I was into astrology at that time. So not only am I Aquarian,
well, tell us that.
but my rising sign is Cancer.
Oh, wow.
But then everything else is Aquarian, like four other, except with, I think, Saturn or something, but my moon, Mercury, it's all Aquarian, right?
So freedom, you need freedom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to feel like, okay, well, you and your girlfriends shouldn't go too far, because if somebody stops you or runs you down or whatever, you could be found beat up and on the side of the road or, whatever. So it was like a scary thing. And so I felt very isolated in that town. And Atlanta was, people were migrating to Atlanta like leaps and bounds at that point in time. And I could see it growing right in front of my eyes. But at the same time, I just didn't feel like it suited me for where I was at that point in time. So after a few years, I stopped teaching. After really only another year, I taught one more year when I went back. And then I was able to meet someone, I think this is when I started to realize the power of networking. And I went to some party of sorts. It was like a professional party that I was invited to. And I met a guy who had his own consulting firm. And he had just received a contract with the city of Atlanta to do what was called job readiness training and job preparation, helping people learn how to go about getting a job. And he was looking for someone to help write the curriculum for that. So after I talked with him, a friend introduced me, and he told me what he was looking for. And I said, well, I'm a teacher. I know how to write curriculum. So I interviewed with him, his partner, and they hired me, and I wrote the curriculum for the training and then went on to become their lead trainer. And I did that for probably about 3 or 4 years. And that was very satisfying because it moved me out of the institutional classroom environment, but I was still sort of in a classroom environment because I'm training people on how to complete job applications, how to prepare yourself in terms of appearance. We even did mock interviews, and this was, again, in the 70s, and we would interview people with videotape and then play it back and critique them on what they needed to do better. So that work then said to me, there are other things you can do, right?
I have a question on that note,
Yeah.
out of curiosity, because it sounds like you what I'm hearing is there was very much a flow in your life. One thing would flow into the other, into opportunity. Was there ever a moment that you reflect back and remember that you had a very specific passion that you wanted to follow? Or was that teaching initially?
Initially, it was teaching.
Okay.
Because I didn't know what else
was out there.
Was out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Those were your
expanders. And so
expanders.
it was sort of mixing the music
Yep.
with the teaching. So I became a music teacher, and my degree is in music education. So that seemed like a natural fit at first. But when I discovered, and now when I look back on that, here's what I think the passion was. I feel like I would have continued with my music, but I would have pursued something more like the business of music, right? Where I was dealing in a bigger field of music. Now, some of my music friends, I still have a very good friend who we were music majors together, and he continued on the music pathway, got his all the way to his PhD, his doctorate in music. He, even back in college, was a jazz musician. He went on to, still play jazz, study jazz. He was the head of a music school up in Boston, the dean there, and that allowed him the freedom and flexibility to play jazz all over the world. So I look at him and I say, dang, dog, man, I could have done that.
Yes.
I could have done that. But at the time, I wasn't where he was, right? He saw the music world much bigger than I did. I loved it and knew I could do something in it. And if I go back to when I was a little girl, seeing my teachers as people that I respected and
expanders,
right. And so I thought, oh, I can do music. I can be a music teacher.
Yeah.
But then it didn't quite fit what I thought it was going to fit, right? So that's why I started to flow into, all right, I have this. What can I take this? How do I leverage this to something else? And that's probably been the rest of my career.
Because you've gone on to leveraging. Because you went on to get your PhD.
Well, actually, my doctorate is an honorary.
Okay.
From
Harvard.
Well, I studied at Harvard, but the honorary degree is from a college in Philadelphia.
I see.
Right. I went to Harvard on a like a special program for nonprofit directors and CEOs.
Excellent.
And so I was given a scholarship to go do that. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I can't wait to get there.
So it's all been kind of, I don't know, I say vicariously or something, but I do believe in trying to follow what I think I hear my spirit saying, right? And I must say here too, because most people in my generation, our parents, it was like graduate college, you got a degree now, get a good job, stay in that job, retire, and live happily ever after.
Be safe. Yeah. Safe road.
And that was like so not my path. Okay. So I felt in many years, it's like, what's wrong with you? You know, like,
Oh, I'm sure.
you know, you keep changing jobs
Yeah.
and people would, oh my gosh, she's going on to something else. I thought she was good at that. Well, why is she now going to that? Like, and I remember later on, this friend of mine at my church, he was sort of an elder in the church, and he had heard that I was moving on to something else. And he pulled me aside one Sunday and he said, you know, he said, I want you to think about staying someplace. He said, you know, you're getting older now, and it's going to be important that you have, you know, a plan for
Stability.
retirement
Yeah.
and stability. And I guess for me, I was just feeling like, oh, now I can try this, you know, or, okay, I can take this step and then that might lead me to another step. So it was always, you know, like trying to do this, but not do it in the traditional sense.
You're
I have,
still climbing.
Yeah, very good friends who went into corporate America. They started out, you know, as management trainees, and they, you know, checked all the boxes and went on to be very successful and make a whole lot more money than I've made.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, you know.
Well, then how did you, if we start to segue into doing nonprofit work and getting into the Urban League, because you did that much later in life.
Much later
It
in
was
life.
one of your final builds.
Exactly.
Of that
exactly.
stairway.
So, so the transition from Place, Atlanta, to Philadelphia. In the mid 70s, I met a guy in Atlanta, and here's how I like to tell the story. I met a guy in Atlanta that was the love of my life.
Oh.
And I thought, oh gosh, finally I met the one.
Yeah.
This is going to be it. And he then said, I'm going to move back to Philadelphia, because he wasn't happy with what he was doing. He taught in Atlanta as well, and he wasn't happy, and he wanted to start a business, and he was a good writer. He had written some, wanted to start writing these like comic books that were focused on Black history.
Wow.
So it would be like a fictional character, but the fictional character was going into history.
A superhero.
Yeah,
Oh,
kind
this
of
is
thing.
so cool.
And so I thought that was so great. And I was like, wow. So he said, well, I'm moving back to Philadelphia. And remember, I said that I was starting to feel confined with Atlanta. And I thought, well, you know, I guess I could. And then a friend of mine who had left Atlanta a few years earlier had moved to Oakland. So this is where California has always kind of been on my radar. And she was begging me to come to Oakland. She's like, you got to come to Oakland.
She's like, the Black Panthers were founded here. This is
like
the
you
spot.
know, this is where we need to be.
Yeah.
Like, come on. And I was like, okay, well, maybe. So when my friend decided he was going back to Philadelphia, I said, okay, maybe this is my opening. I'll go to Oakland, right? So I called my parents. Remember, no cell phones, no tweeting, no texting, no nothing. I have to call them on the phone. And I said, Mom, Dad, you know, I said, I'm thinking about leaving Atlanta. Oh, good. My mom says, well, maybe you'll come back home. Are you going? I said, well, no. I said, I'm actually thinking. I said, you know, my girlfriend, Ann, I said, she moved to Oakland, da-da-da. I said, I'm thinking about going to Oakland. And I'll never forget my mom. She said, California, you can't go to California. I said, Mom, it's okay. And she said, oh my goodness, you never get home now. If you go to California, we'll never see you again. I just can't have, you cannot go to California. I was like, Mom, and my mom was a little hyper. She would get, you know, a little, you know. So I thought, okay, I'll let it sink in for a while. So that was that conversation. So then in my mind, I start thinking, well, maybe I should consider going to Philadelphia because I'm still talking to him and we still consider ourselves like a couple, so to speak. And I'm thinking, well, maybe Philadelphia, is better. So I talked to my mom another Sunday. We generally talk on Sundays. And I said, well, Mom, would you feel better if I went to Philadelphia? And she said, oh, that would be so much better because at least you wouldn't be that far away from Cleveland. You could get home more and all that. She said, but I'll say, this was always my parents, she said, if you really must go to California, she said, just promise me that you'll buy a round trip ticket so that you can always get home.
Oh, that is so beautiful.
And I thought, oh, thanks, Mom. Okay. So then it's like, well, she really would like for me to go to Philly. I'm thinking I'm in love, so maybe I should go to Philly, So, okay. Question answered. I'm going to Philly.
Yeah.
So I pack up my little car. Actually, no, I sold my car because I needed the cash. I sold my car. I rented a car and packed up all my stuff because actually I like sports cars, going back to the Camaro. And I had a 2-seater, so I'm like, okay, I can't get very much in that to go someplace. So I thought I could probably get a nice piece of change for it, so I'll sell it. Got the money, rented a car, packed it up, moved to Philly. I get to Philly, and I go, with my friend, and so we start living together. And I guess after I got there, I realized it was going to be harder than I thought, that the transition. So I didn't have a car, but Philly is the kind of city like New York, you can get around. There's
public trains,
subways, trains, everything. So I was able to get around, and but I realized that my friend really couldn't offer very much at that particular point in time. And he was kind of, didn't have a job, trying to do this creative thing, it just was no security or stability anywhere in what he was doing. And then now I'm here. And so I kind of take up the mantle of, okay, well, let me get a job and then I can help both of us while you're doing the creative thing. At least we have a roof over our heads and food and whatever. So that kind of became the plan. And I was able to do that. Well, as we go into that, a few years out, because this was 1976. So in 1979, 1978 actually, I get pregnant.
You with Rahad.
With Rahad.
Who's the most magical person? So meant to be.
So I'm like, now I'm really kind of in a pickle here.
You're in it.
Yeah, because I'm like, okay, I could feel the relationship wasn't really making it. I'm struggling, trying to keep the basics going. Now I'm pregnant. I've got to decide what to do. So I talked with him and I'm like, okay, are we going to get married? Are we going to make this commitment? I need to know what we're going to do. And he didn't want to get married. So that really broke my heart. It really did. At the time. I look back on it now and I think, oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. But,
so anyone listening
but at
who
the
might
time,
be in this.
Yes, at the time, it broke my heart. And I think the thing that broke my heart more, Lacey, was I had to tell my mom and dad.
Oh, so hard at that time, in that era.
So I had to tell them, again, a phone call. And I explained the situation. Of course, the first thing out of my mom's mouth was, well, are you going to get married?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I don't know. I don't think he's really feeling it. So then that upset my dad. And it just kind of became this thing. And I didn't know what to do. So I felt, though, that I was 33 at the time. And I said, if I'm going to have a child, now is the time.
It really is.
Right?
Yeah.
So I felt like, as a lot of women, we talk about the clock, the biological clock and all that. And of course, my friends that I'd gone to college with, their kids were growing up at the time, and I'm just now having a baby. So I thought, I'm going to have the baby, whether we get married or not. And so then I told him I was okay, because I wasn't going to fight about being married. If he didn't want to be married, then it wasn't going to be a thing for me to like make him want to be married. So we decided, I'd have the child. We were still living together all through, Rahad being born, and up until he was 2, we lived together. But at that point, I knew. And so let me go back to my parents. My parents also said, as I'm in my months of pregnancy, and I went to Cleveland, and my dad said, you should consider just moving back to Cleveland, because if you're not going to get married, you don't have any other family there, you're going to need support, and we need to be closer to you so we can help out, with the kid and all of that. And I thought, oh man, that I just felt like,
if Atlanta felt
from
small.
heaven. Yeah. But it's like, again, a place to go.
Yeah.
I didn't have to feel like I was out on my own, or, well, I'm in it, so I got to stay in it no matter how bad it is, kind of thing.
It gave you an opening.
Right. It gave me an opening.
Yeah.
So I said to my father, I said, Daddy, I said, I think I want to stay where I am for now, because I had started working at one of the local universities, and I really liked the job. I was working in cooperative education, so I was sort of leveraging that job readiness, here's how you get a job thing, to now working with college students around an experiential experience in the workplace, right? So that felt very good and a natural transition for me. So I said, I have a good job. I want to see if I can make it, on my own. I said, but if you will just keep my room held open for me so that if I have to come back, I will come back. And, I lived in Philly for 38 years and never went back.
And as a single mom for most of them.
As a single mom, yes, because then when Rahad was 2, I left the university, and I found the most amazing opportunity to actually be a part of a startup nonprofit organization called Inroads. And Inroads, sort of a little fascinating story. A white gentleman who had graduated from Princeton, he was a corporate type, business type, but while on that track, he also had a passion for, he was from Chicago, and he had this passion for the kids that were growing up in the ghettos and barrios in Chicago who didn't have an entree into the business world, right? Because corporations, particularly in the 70s, 80s, 90s, I hate to keep saying this, but even up until today, you know what they look like, right?
Yeah.
And so his roommate at Princeton was a guy who later on became the chairman and CEO of one of the biggest oil companies in the country, right? And so they still talked, and he told him what his interest was. It was sort of like, how do I do this? I'd like to be able to do something. I've got this business thing going on here, but I want to also have something in the community where I can feel like I'm making a difference. So the way Inroads came about was his friend suggested sort of a boot camp like experience where you could take kids out into the wilderness, the outward bound kind of, teach them survival skills and, how to make it, that would be the thing that Black and brown kids could use. So Frank, it was his name, he's now passed on, and he became Father Frank later in his life. He became a priest.
Wow.
He said, he said, I get the concept. He said, but Black and brown kids come from survival. They have learned how to survive in these very impoverished areas in these cities. They exist on almost nothing as family. So he starts to say, I don't think survival is what they need. So then, I guess through this brilliant moment he had, he said, but where they do need to learn to survive is in the corporate arena, right? Because they don't have mentors, they don't have people opening doors for them. They don't. So what if we could, and some of your listeners will be familiar with the talented 10th kind of concept, which is, what if you take the best and the brightest out of these communities, and as they are going into college, support them with internships in corporations, and then on the side, provide them with coaching and training to help them more assimilate into that culture of corporate America, because corporate America is its own culture.
It is. So
its own
yeah,
culture.
Yeah.
And if you don't have parents that come out of that culture, or anybody that you know that's in that culture, or anyone in your community that's a part of that culture, it's like going into a different
country.
Yeah.
It's a whole different thing.
It's different.
So I'm quickly interrupting this episode to invite you, if you're ready to start your manifestation journey, or if anything you've heard in our manifestation episodes has piqued your interest, to begin. We have a la carte workshops in everything from the basics bundle, which is what we recommend to everyone who starts. It's the formula that actually teaches you how to manifest, unblocked inner child, and unblocked shadow. We also have a la carte workshops on love and money. But the real gem is the Pathway membership, because it encompasses every single workshop we have. It's a year-long membership with full access to the few a la carte offerings we have, and exclusive workshops not available anywhere else, such as the daily practice, which is what everybody in the Pathway uses, hopefully at least 3 times a week to daily, in order to truly create the new neural pathways that one needs in order to manifest, and houses the library of our deep imaginings, which is our unique hypnosis process that allows you to get into your subconscious and overwrite those old neural pathways, creating the new ones. You can use our special code EXPANDED, all caps, EXPANDED, to receive $20 off your first a la carte workshop purchase, or $20 off your first month of the Pathway. Again, that's all caps, EXPANDED, EXPANDED. Okay, now back to the episode.
So he started this in 1970 in Chicago. And then in 1981, they were ready to open. Well, they weren't ready to open, but a chief executive in Philadelphia read an article that was in Business Week magazine. The article was entitled From Ghetto to Management. And this article caught the attention of this Philadelphia executive, who said, why is this not in Philadelphia? Right? It was in all these other cities, but 11 other cities at the time, but it wasn't in Philadelphia. So he called, inquired, someone came to talk to him, and he said, well, I think we should have this in Philadelphia. Now, the key to Inroads was that as a nonprofit, it didn't receive any government funds. It was all paid for through fees from corporations, and the corporations had to not only pay a fee to the Inroads organization for operations, but also a salary to the interns that they brought in.
Excellent.
Right? And so they talked to him. They say, okay, he said, I'm going to put up the money. We want you in Philadelphia. So then it was like they had to hire someone. At the same time, I'm at the university. I'm in my what I call 3-year itch, which is the first year you learn a job, the second year you do the job, the third year it's like, okay, what else?
Yeah.
Okay, what else can I do?
True.
It's got to be something else. And somehow this article from Business Week lands on my desk at the university.
Thanks, universe. Oh, God.
And
Whoever.
I read it, and I'm fascinated by it. And I thought, oh, my goodness, I could love this. This is why. So the person that sent me the article, he was also on the campus. And I call him up, and he tells me that his friend in Chicago said that they're coming to Philly, and they're looking for someone to run the operation in Philly. And he said, I think you would be fantastic. So I'm like, oh, my goodness, this might be it. So I go through all that. Long story short, I get the job. They hire me. So now I'm doing a total startup on my own in a city, something I've never done. But I knew I had the backing of this one executive who, was very helpful, gave me office space, whatever I needed to get this thing going. And it just started to take off from there. And I was the only staff for about the first year. Then I hired a second person. We started recruiting. We got the best kids we could find, got them in some great jobs. We then, I had to build like this board of directors. And, so it was a lot of training for me, learning about the nonprofit sector and how the nonprofit sector raises money and the things you have to do. So that I stayed there for about 11 years.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Not to interrupt, but behind the scene, for the many listeners who might be interested in this and, identify as mothers and they're in that, how were you as a single mom? What was the childcare behind this? How did you swing all of this?
Yeah. So this is the stuff you look back and say, I don't know how I did all this. I just don't know. So, at the age of 2, so while I was at the university, I found, a woman near the university who kept just a couple of children. I think she had 2 other kids. And then someone at the university connected me to her. And I thought, okay, maybe if she'll take Rahad, that'll be great. Because I was still living in Philadelphia. And the campus was about 50 miles away from Philadelphia, but I drove back and forth every day. Me and another very good friend, we would trade off driving. So I needed a babysitter that was closer to the campus because I didn't want something to happen and I'm 50 miles away and I had to get back to Philly. So I liked her. She fell in love with Rahad and she became, my sitter. He was 5 months old, so he was her youngest. I think the other child was maybe 2, and then she had another kid that came after kindergarten for half a day. So it was just a small group of kids. She was wonderful, really, really wonderful. And so that's how I managed that commute with childcare. Well, then when I took the Inroads position, now I need real child care in the city. And that was a nightmare I didn't anticipate because the better child care, meaning the ones where people are recommending them or whatever, they had waiting lists. And you just couldn't walk in and say, oh, can we take my kids?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was like you had to sign up. There's an application process. You had to go through all this. So now I'm starting to really kind of freak out because I'm like, oh, God, I need childcare. I don't know what to do. So I first went to just someone that was recommended who she didn't run a daycare center, but she kept kids in her home. And I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. I met with her. She seemed nice enough. Her home was nice, so I felt like it would be okay. I took Rahad there. And I just recently told him this story because I hadn't told him. And I took him there the first day. I came back and to pick him up. And her upstairs, which I didn't think the kids were going to be upstairs because what I saw was all downstairs. She did have this upstairs. But she had this like gate like going across the stairway. So I'm assuming that she had the kids upstairs, and maybe that's where she was. So she had the kids upstairs, and she had this gate. So when I get to her house, she comes to the door, and I hear Rahad wailing. And Rahad, he was not a big crier. If he cried, something was really wrong. He had hurt himself, fell down, something. He just, he wasn't that kind of child, right? He wasn't a tantrum child. So I'm hearing crying, and I'm thinking, what? So I run to him, and I grab him, and he had been crying for a long time. You know how kids get the sniffles?
Yeah.
And he was doing that. And I was like, oh, my God. So I really don't recall what I said to the woman. I hope I was halfway nice to her. But I was so upset. I grabbed him. I grabbed the bag, and I said to her, I think I said, how much do I owe you? Because this is the last day he will not be coming back.
Oh, yeah.
And I gave her the money, and I took him, and we left. And I thought, oh, my goodness, what did I do? So now I'm feeling guilty. What am I going to do? So I guess I must have started talking, calling people, trying to figure this out. The good part was that I had some flexibility even then. This is 1981. To work at home a little bit, because my boss was actually in Pittsburgh, which was a little ways away. And at the time, I didn't yet have an office. So I was able to be at home while I'm trying to work through this daycare situation. I went back to one of the daycare centers that I had applied to, and I just talked to the director one-on-one, and I told her I really had an emergency situation. I told her what the situation was. I asked her, was there any way I could get him to move up on the wait list? And I'm trying to remember, I think what she ended up having to make some kind of moves within her process, because some kids were only there for so many hours. Others were there for half day, not whole day. I was looking for a full day. So she did the math, right, and came up with a spot that she was able to slip Rahad into. And I mean, these are just like the blessings, I call them, that kind of happened with people and friends. Now, the person that recommended me to go there was someone that was on her board. So I guess I look at that now and say, that had a little bit to do with it.
That's
I'm
the
sure.
networking part.
But there you go. So, but I was able to get him in there. It was called Building Blocks. And he loved it. He loved it there. It was a great daycare center. He met some really good friends. And that's all Rahad ever cared about, was having a friend.
Aww.
As long as I have friends. I remember when he went on to public school. Well, he didn't go to public school until high school. I put him in private school. This is accentuating the difficulty of this single parent thing. Working for a nonprofit. But I had to put him in private school because, as my parents, education was such a value in our household. And I couldn't afford for him to have a bad start to his education. And so I felt like whatever sacrifices I needed to do, I would do it until I could do something better. So I put him in private school. And I remember a couple of times he was the only black kid in the class. And I was upset with that because they had told me that they would work to make sure that didn't happen. It did happen. And I said to Rahad, okay, how do you feel? Like, are you okay with this? Are you feeling isolated? And he said, Mom, I really don't care if they're black or they're not black or white. He said, as long as I have friends, that's all that matters.
He's such
and
a
I thought,
magical person.
Okay, well, as long as he has friends, I got to be okay with that. You know, I got to. But then by the time he got to the 8th grade, he too was feeling a little bit of cultural isolation there, and knew that school, which was a great school, it was a Quaker school.
Wow.
Germantown Friends, wonderful environment. It was so expensive. I have to tell you, I just recently, probably before I retired, actually got
Paid
out
it
of
off.
debt.
Yeah.
For those
Jeez.
8 years of school, I was
Wow.
paying way big college tuition,
Oh
for
my
him to go to K
gosh.
through 8. But I felt like it was necessary, and it gave me a sense of satisfaction and comfort knowing that he was being taken care of in that setting. So then in high school, he went to a public school, but it was a special admission school. And he, he took all advanced placement classes and, which again, it was more diverse, but he was still in a track that was so white, right? And I kept saying, oh, there must be black kids in advanced placement. Like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
But it's kind of the systems and the way they're set up that takes a lot of parental engagement,
And
on the part.
interference.
And interference.
Yeah.
And you have to call it out. You can't, just like when I saw him, the only one in the class, and I said, well, wait a minute. The headmaster promised me that he would never be the only black kid in the class.
Yeah.
But stuff happens. So anyway, he did very well in high school, and then that led to really a full scholarship to Morehouse College.
Incredible.
And, so again, the blessings come along. But I also had to develop a support system. Now, this is where the story gets really, really kind of weird, some people might say. Because although his dad and I, we never married, and at the age of 2, we split and did not get back together again. But his dad's mother and I almost became best friends.
Same with my mom and my grandmother.
Really?
And my mom and my father's sister. And they split when I was 1.
Yeah.
And my mom lived with his sister. I mean, they
Oh
were
my goodness.
my paternal side was her greatest support.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I am sure, Lacey, that because of that relationship is why I stayed in Philadelphia, right? Because I wanted him to know his grandmother. She still does adore Rahad. She will be 102 in July.
Incredible. Just
So
amazing.
Rahad and Helena are planning to fly out there and be with her.
They're
on her
so
birthday.
lucky to have her still.
Yeah. But she became my support, along with a few very good friends who also had kids his age. And, we were able to just become like family. Also, the church became a good support network for me because there were programs at church that he could get into. There were lots of young people at church. That was kind of how I balanced the diversity piece because at school there was not a lot of diversity, but it was an all-black church. So he was kind of hanging out and going to skating parties, with black kids. They would go to 76ers games and, things like that. So there was some balance around that for me. But that's how I basically was able to do it. And then in 1992, I guess it was, I realized he was going into high school. He had to go to college, and I had absolutely $0 to send him to college because I had used all my money and everything that I could borrow to send him
to K through 8. It's so wild.
So I thought, okay, as much as I love inroads, I've got to move on because I have to make more money.
Yeah.
So the corporate world calls, and I took a corporate job, and it gave me a huge bump in my salary. And I was also able to sort of do what I liked doing, which was, it was 1992. The company was on the brink of transitioning from the old, your younger audience won't relate to this, but what we used to call equal opportunity, where they counted the number of black people and the number of Latino people and all that kind of stuff.
What's the other name for it as well?
Now, it was transitioning to diversity,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And they were calling it diversity training.
Yeah.
And so, they were looking at getting away from quotas and that kind of thing, but still putting value on it. And so they really focused it on cultural diversity it did get deep into what I think of now around equity
Yeah.
and inclusion and things like that. So the guy that hired me had been connected to me with Inroads networking.
Wow, yeah.
Right?
You're good at
And-
this. I'm not good at networking. I'm like, I need to take, you're my expander
And
for networking.
So he said, Pat, I would love to have you come to our company. And he was very high up in the company. See, that's the other thing. You know, he had clout and power. In fact, he reported right to the CEO. And he said, come help us put together this diversity program. I need somebody to design it, figure out what we need to do, get us started. And I thought, yes, I'll do that. I'll do that.
Amazing.
And so I did. I hired a great consultant, and we worked on these vignettes of, different, not only just different ethnic groups, but we also talked about gays and
Gender,
lesbians. And,
yeah,
it was
sexuality.
it
Oh,
was
it's
it was
amazing.
really kind of ahead of its time
Oh,
when
yeah.
I think about it now.
What year was this?
But listen, 1993.
Oh, yeah.
By then, 1993. So then I didn't learn until we get all the way to the execution, which was the training. And I trained a lot of the senior executives. And my friend tells me that he's gay. Now, he was also married with kids. But I never knew that in all the years that I had known him. And of course, that's one of those things that the corporate arena is like you would never, see yourself going up the ladder like this.
It's like politics.
It's like politics, right? So that for me was a big, big moment. And he's just a fantastic person. He did go on and he left the company because the company was acquired by another company. And he told them, that was when he basically came out to them. And he said, I'm not taking another job unless you know this about me, and I'm not willing to go back in the closet now. Right? And so he didn't take the job. And, he went on to do some different types of things, but really good things. So all of that for me then became a way to get money for Rahad to go to college. So then he lands his scholarship, and I'm like, okay, now I got to get out of here.
Yeah, I've got to do what's
I got to
right
get
for
out of
me.
here because the company was bought by a company in Chicago. They wanted me to either move to Chicago, move to New York. I didn't want to do either thing. I said, no, okay. I'm just going to go back to Philly and take my chances. Yeah. So again, telling folks in my network about what's going on, I was able to go back in Philly, lead a career development organization. So still sort of in this whole career job, interwoven thing. And I became a general manager for a career development firm. They were New York based, but they were opening an office in Philly. So I had now the nonprofit startup in my bailiwick, and now more of a corporate startup for a smaller business, right? So that led me then to executive search, because this became Rahad's in college. Okay, how do I make more money than this? And that particular role was satisfying for about 6 years. I stayed there about 6 years. But it was also working with people as they were losing their jobs and then helping them get reconnected into the workplace. And so I found it to be draining emotionally, because many times I knew people were going to lose their jobs before they knew. And I'll never forget the day that it really came home to me was when my neighbor that lived in the back of me, the company that he worked for became my biggest client. And I knew that he was going to lose his job before he did.
I mean, that's literally
And
it came home.
and that was a big emotional thing. And I said, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. So I went into executive search, which was a sort of another side of the business. They wanted me to come in and work with them around diversity. A lot of their clients were saying, we want to see slates with diverse people, and you're
And what year was
presenting us
this now?
This was now 2002.
Wow.
2002.
We haven't made like that much progress. I mean, we kind of have, but not that much progress is fucking
I'm telling you, I know we haven't. I know we haven't.
Crazy.
And that's what is in many ways upsetting, but more frustrating to someone like me, right? Because I feel like we've been doing this for so doggone long. What is it that's holding us from accepting people and respecting people and having respecting each other's differences and giving everybody dignity? You know, I like, what is that? What is that?
And when you, like, as a a woman of color with, I'll say, maybe I'm taking a shot in the dark, 5 planets in Aquarius, you have a view from the top.
I have a view, yeah.
That's sort of the perspective you get. What do you think that is when you meditate on this? Like, where is the block still? I mean, it's many layers of blocks and things, but what's your general overview or hypothesis?
So I think for me, where I sit, and you're exactly right, like up here looking down on it, I think so much of it is an American problem, right? It's an American problem that was created by America, right? And now we are trying to undo that wrong, right? And for an African American, as you can see, I refer to myself as Black. It's what I'm comfortable with.
I love that terminology because I know that there is a difference. Like, I've been doing my education lately, and there is a preference. There's a few. I just read a quote recently. It was in a Vox article where a man and a woman, and they were like, "I'm Black. Stop calling me a person of color. I'm Black." And I love that. I love that ownership. So thank you for that.
So I sit there, and part of what I know is, and now some of my volunteer work, I've been engaged with immigration issues, and as I listen to what's happening, and I think it's such an ugly part of our society. But I also can't help but look at slavery right alongside of immigration. And what's happening today is people kind of, again, lump all that together and say, well, we all immigrated here. And I find that I have to correct people and say, no, my ancestors didn't. They didn't come here because they wanted to come. And there's a big distinction in that. So I think in America, the periods that we went through, first it was slavery, then, if you've seen Lincoln, that was a good part where it showed that Lincoln, not that he necessarily was feeling all this, but politically it made sense for him to do this. And he had to really work at getting this done. But again, it never was really resolved. It was like, okay, we're here and this. So what happens? You get Jim Crow, and then all these things keep popping up where because you are this color, you are less than, or, and I think some of it even in the Constitution where it talks about, let me take that back. I don't know if this is in the Constitution. It may be. I'm not a historian, but that Negroes, they were called then, were only 3/5 of a person, right? And so when you hear today these things, and the one that comes to mind is when the Obamas were in the White House, and you would hear these crazy, mean people calling them apes and referring to them, as animals, and I thought, as beautiful as they are, who would ever think that, right?
Unbelievable.
But if you don't believe that Black people are full humans, then yes, you could have that hypothesis, right? So there's something around anti-Blackness, and I think that's why I gravitate toward the word. So because there's whiteness, which was created in America. There's no such, really, there's not a race called whiteness, but there's whiteness. And then there's anti-Blackness. And I think until America begins to solve that gap, we're going to keep, having to deal in this space of hatred and racism and it go, xenophobia. It's just all over the place. It's like, if you're not, it's like we fear what we don't know. That's what I kind of have boiled it down to. And if you've never experienced Black people or Latinx people or gay people, or, if you've never had that, then there's a bit of fear there about, well, what? Am I going to be comfortable? What are they going to do? They might ask me something. It's all this stuff that goes on in people's minds. And I think that keeps them from venturing into that. And I used to laugh a lot, I still do, when I hear people say, some of my best friends are Black. And I go,
it's a thing
right,
still.
okay.
Or even my children are Black. When you are one of the halves of the white parent, there's still one of our guests who actually just had a podcast episode come out last week, who's so beautiful. Oh, she's so beautiful. I don't know if you're on Instagram, but you do have to follow.
I am on Instagram.
Oh, okay. Maybe you do follow her already.
But not on Facebook, but on Instagram.
No, man, who's on Facebook anymore, man? That's talk about 2003. No, I'm kidding. But her name's Layla Delia, and she's half Spanish and half Black and grew up in South Central, and they sat her mother down, who's Spanish, after Trayvon, and her mom's like, but you guys don't experience racism. Her mother, as a Spanish mother, just didn't get it. And they finally sat there. She was telling the story on the podcast and really explained everything they had gone through. And that's when her mother finally went, oh my gosh, and became an activist around it. Yeah. But even the fact of but my children are Black, it's
right.
Yeah.
And I think so much of that is, I am also an eternal optimist, I think. So I'm always looking for the bright side.
Aquarian.
Right?
Yeah.
As I see the future and where we're headed, I think that, or I hope that we will sort of grow out of this phase, because things are changing. So I have a good friend who is part of my friend network, and he passed several years ago. But he said one day, we were talking about all this, and he said, I don't know what the answer to racism is. He said, every time you think, you take a half a step forward, because it's like Obama became president, and many of us, my age and older, we never thought we'd see a Black president. It was kind of like, whoa, well, maybe we're on to something finally, but we also knew that this wasn't the, where people started talking about post-racial. Well, no, I don't think we're that far. We're not post-racial.
Definitely not post-racial.
But maybe we have taken a leap here. Maybe there's, a leap. So he said, the only thing I think will solve this problem is if you look at the younger generation, they don't grow up with the same biases unless they were taught those biases, right? Yeah. But they are more open. They're more engaging. He said, look at how people are marrying, interracially. And this is like more and more. I mean, during my era, that was like, oh my God, what? She married a white man. Oh, he married a white woman. That was.
And it wasn't even that much earlier from your generation where it was illegal.
It was illegal.
It's insane.
Correct.
Insane.
And so he said, I think we will not see the light of day with this until there is so much intermarrying that the children, you can't identify them.
That's what I mean, I don't get to have a voice in this, but I really can't wait for that.
He's like, after a while, and he was a really funny, humorous guy. He said, after a while, everybody's going to be beige. And so it won't matter. It won't matter. So that's the optimistic view. But it really is still, even today, sort of fast forward to what I'm doing today. I'm not working as much. I do some consulting here and there, but I mostly volunteer. And I'm volunteering with the League of Women Voters, which I think since 2016 kind of became my medicine to fighting a lot of what's going on in Washington. Because the League of Women Voters is so involved in engaging voters in our democracy and helping voters, educating them around policy and how policy drives all this stuff that we're seeing with policing and, institutions and all of that. So I'm engaged with that. But we just last year on the U.S. level, it's a U.S. national organization, started a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative within the League of Women Voters. And I felt like I was in the dark ages all over again. I thought, what is going on? But I will say with this group, one of the things when I told all of my friends around the country, oh, I'm volunteering, I'm doing some great volunteer work with the League of Women Voters. To a T, everyone has said, I'm surprised you're with them. Because I always thought that was an old white women's organization. Now, the good news is they now know this too. Okay? Yeah. They now know that the world perceives us as an old white women's organization. And that's probably not going to get us into our next century, which next year with the 100th celebration of the 19th Amendment, the League of Women Voters will also turn 100, right? And so we are in this whole transformation journey to make the League look more like America, right? To be more inclusive of who we are, because politics will not go away. It's going to be around. Certainly, if the average age is 70, okay, we're not going to be around that much longer. And so how do we engage? So I find myself, Lacey, again, in this thing, this position of bringing diversity and equity and inclusion to an arena. And now I'm really, for my own learning, trying to understand, gender and the non-binary and all of the different sources. I went to a recent workshop on transgender, and I was just amazed at all of the different, I think the instructor said there are somewhere between almost 80 different labels.
Pronouns,
really, that you can, and I thought, wow, this is really like an awakening, for me personally, but then also within this context of the group that I'm a part of, trying to help them understand how the world is changing and how we have to engage people that are not like us or that we don't understand or whatever, because just because we don't understand them, and goes back to what I said about fear. I think the fear is that, I don't know, they'll make fun of me, or I don't know what to say to them, or I don't know. There's something there.
Sure.
Something there that doesn't seem to bother me, but I know that it bothers a lot of other people.
Absolutely.
And so I think we just have to keep working on this. And I often think of Martin Luther King. One of his other sayings was that the art, toward justice is long, right? So it's not going to get there. We may not get there even in my lifetime, but I am optimistic because I look at with Rahad's marriage, my nephew who recently got married.
I saw their Instagram on
so
Helena's.
cute.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to my very good friend's daughter's wedding in a couple weeks. And they're all interracial marriages.
Incredible.
And so I'm sort of like, okay, I see what my friend Richard, I kind of get his point, but I think that's our evolution around this. And there's so many different aspects of institutional racism that you're trying to deal with that it becomes like really trying to push a boulder up a hill.
Absolutely.
And it's really tough.
So I have a couple of selfish and sort of rapid questions for you. And I think that many people will also really, like to hear this information from your perspective, who
Okay.
has gone through this journey. I mean, in the corporate world, the nonprofit world, educational systems. What advice do you have to give to entrepreneurs who want to be more inclusive?
I think I would say to entrepreneurs, and part of my work at the Urban League was actually opening an entrepreneurship center where we worked with small businesses, and I found that work very gratifying because I think that also is when we think about economic or wealth inequality. Owning your own business is really a way to begin to kind of level, that playing field, right? So in terms of being inclusive, I say go first for the best talent that you can find. I would also recommend that you search to make sure that the talent that you're finding is coming from a diverse pool. Okay.
Yeah.
If everyone that you interview or talk with is of the same,
All the things.
right,
Yeah.
then you're not going, So, and I'm not a big sports fan, but especially an NFL fan, but I am, this one I do relate to, which is one of the former owners, coaches of the NFL had this rule around how to get more black coaches into the NFL. And he said that, I think he basically said to the commissioner, every time there's an opening for a coach, the slate has to be diverse. Now, that doesn't mean that every time there's an opening, a diverse person will be selected, but you're giving yourself a better shot.
I think that's
and I
great
would
advice.
recommend that for
Absolutely.
entrepreneurs.
That's so, I love that. In your opinion, how can diversity and inclusion help to push companies forward?
Oh, I would say that, and this has been my experience. There's a saying that says you don't know what you don't know, or something like that, until you don't know it, or whatever it is. But I think what that's saying to me is you don't realize how much of a broader perspective you get on whether it's your products, your services, when you have a very uniform group of people making those decisions, right? So it's like, here's an old example. Back in the day, you could look in any magazine and you would never see a person that looks like me in the magazine, right? But yet you're trying to sell me shoes or whatever it is you're trying to sell me, right? So I happen to be the kind of person that says, why don't they have any black people in this book, right? In fact, my son, Rahad, used to say, Mom, why are you always counting black people? Now, the reason he said that was we would go places, and I exposed him to as much as I could afford and as much as I could, especially on airplanes. This is back when he was a kid. We get on the airplane, going to Disney or someplace, right? And there's like me, him, and maybe 2 other black people on the plane. And I said, Dad, it's only 4 black people. And he's like, Mom, what's up with that? And I said, what's up with that is I know there are other people that want to go to Disney other than us.
Absolutely.
Why aren't they on this plane? There's something about that that's not right, right? And so I think the way that it gets broken down is having this different perspective for someone to bring that to your attention and say, you know what, black people have money too, and they would really like to go to Disney. Maybe we should show them that they can do this as well by putting some of them in our photos or whatever. It's a very kind of, minor thing, but again, you won't get that perspective unless you have someone there
on the team
to tell you. Just recently, I saw there was a big kerfuffle around some of the designers, around blackface and all of this. And I kept saying, they can't have anyone black that works for that company.
No.
Because
somebody would have been
if
like,
I
do
saw
not
that,
do that.
I would have said, what?
Yeah.
You're going to do what?
Yeah. 1,000%.
So if you don't do it, I feel like you're putting yourself at risk, and you're putting your company at risk, because you have a blind spot. You have a blind spot, and there are just things that you won't see unless you have that other perspective. But those perspectives make for such a rich and robust environment. So
Culturally.
I think it's
and
cool.
we're really trying to educate ourselves on this so deeply.
Yeah.
And I'm as a person who's trying to educate myself so deeply and have so many blind spots out of white privilege, what are your thoughts on anything you can say to that I can help myself and anybody listening to educate ourselves further?
Oh, gee, I think the mere fact that you recognize your white privilege.
Oh, it's been a
is
journey.
huge.
It's been, and I have to say that absolutely, candidly, wholeheartedly, that it's been
huge.
A journey.
It's huge.
Because that recognition wasn't there. I didn't understand that difference, and so.
And most people don't.
Yeah.
And I think again, it takes a series of learnings. It's almost like re-education in a way, because many times people are offended by the terms, and they don't go deep enough to understand what's behind the terms or what's under them to learn what this means. But then when you kind of put them in environments where, and there's a test, I just saw this recently. I think you could go on a website. It's at the Harvard School around implicit bias or something. But it helps you understand your privilege by the way you identify even pictures and things like that, right? And what first comes to mind.
Subconscious
almost. Right. What
Wow.
first comes to mind when you see this picture of this person, that kind of thing. And I think once you go through some education to understand how this can be, then you can start looking at yourself and say, oh, okay, I never thought, because, I could just as well be white and have come from the background that I just described to you, working class, first to go to college, okay, but my skin is black. And so that's where the sort of anti-blackness comes in, because as a white person, I'm kind of naturally pulled into it, right? Oh, you'll be fine. You'll be great. You'll be great, whether I can do the job or not, right? But because of what my subconscious is saying about this color, there's some little bit of, I like her. She has a great smile, but I don't know. It's what we see in the workplace today around people with different names, right? And I have to tell you, when we name Rahad, his
what does
name does
Rahad
have
mean?
a meaning.
Yeah, I've always wondered.
It means one with the sun, S-U-N, sun. And I thought long and hard about whether we should do that, because I knew that, it was during the era where many black people were starting to, name their children with African names or Muslim names, or or names that they just created.
Totally.
Yeah. And so it was like we were feeling that, like, hey, we don't have to be John and Sally. We can be, just Sally.
I love that. I love
whatever.
that. So true.
So I knew that at some point that could again become a bias, because now people look at the name, they don't even have to see your face, and they say, Jamal, I don't know. Nah, go on to the next one. Go to the next one. So it's just something that we have to continue to work at. And I'm very optimistic when I meet people like you who say that they're working on it. And that's what I'm really trying to do now. I have to say that some of the women that I'm volunteering with, we're not all on the same page with this. They don't quite understand why it's necessary. We've never had to. Why is it so important now? We welcome everyone, all of that. But it's easy for you to say because you're on that side of the fence.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I would just say recognizing your privilege is a big, big step, because I think it will make you more conscious as you go into these things. And there's a lot of talk about, becoming allies to people.
I want your thoughts on that.
Okay, yeah. And so I have a little bit of a different spin. I like the concept of ally, meaning you relate, that you have a deeper understanding of the issue. But I'm not sure ally says that you will kind of walk the distance with me. And so I heard this recently and I thought, that's the word I want. I want you to be more of a co-conspirator.
Oh, I love that. I really love that, because I was reading an article recently and I really loved how someone phrased this. They're like, I don't get to call myself an ally. The person of color or the black person in front of me gets to decide if I'm their ally. But I love the co-conspirator.
Because it means you got to walk with me. You're not just going to say, oh, I know that's wrong. And that shouldn't happen to black people, right? Or that shouldn't happen to brown people or whatever. That shouldn't happen to gays. But will you actually walk with them in the fight? Will you get in there yourself and do something? Yeah, the activism part.
I want to know this, and this could be the final question if you're getting tired, and things. But I had this moment recently, and I'm such a pacifist, but I don't have the luxury, or I do have the luxury of being a pacifist, but the state of the world doesn't have the luxury of that. And again, I'm really trying. It's been a steep and hard learning curve for me to understand this and my privilege and learning about that. And I was sitting with two men in my hometown, and there was a part of me that purposefully wanted to get this place that we have as a retreat place through the company in a conservative town that I come from, because I know that because of algorithms and things like that, if we're really wanting to speak to another side of a conservative, we have to actually be around them, right?
Yes.
So I'm sitting in my hometown, and there's a cowboy next to me, and he's speaking, white man, and he obviously has been raised in this town, has never left. And he said, "Oh yeah, I went to Austin because I had just been there." And he's like, "But boy, when I was there, it was Pride Week, and boy, are they just so proud, and it's the whole bigotry." And I get to sit there out of privilege and be like, I know everything that's going on here. I'm versed in psychology, and this is the work I do. I understand he's never left. This has been totally taught to him. He doesn't know better. He's had the opportunity, but it's never taken the opportunity, right? What do I do in that moment? And I'm what, you're so trained in this. You're so versed in this. I'm like, what do I do to hold up my now end of the bargain, understanding my privilege?
I don't have a real recipe, that's because honestly, I've been struggling somewhat with this question myself, particularly after the 2016 election. Yeah. And I used to say, oh, gee, I can talk to pretty much anyone. I'm very open when it comes to people. I can easily meet people and start a conversation, and, it's just kind of who I am. But I have found that I have difficulty with people who were on the other side, so to speak. And the reason I say on the other side and say it that way is just not to get so political.
It's a lens.
Yeah, but it's a lens, exactly, because I typically approach it with questions, right? And I thought to myself, I need to learn something here because I'm not seeing what they're seeing. So how do I ask them to help me, see what they see?
Yeah.
Now, what I have found a couple of times I've experimented with that is that it usually doesn't go well for me, in that I walk away more frustrated than I started.
I honestly approached it in exactly that way. I asked questions and I was like, I just got nowhere.
I just got nowhere.
Yeah.
And then I walk away saying, what the fuck did I do? I should have just shut up in the first place.
Because I know if I go off, he's not going to listen.
They won't hear a word.
Nothing.
They won't hear one word.
Yeah.
So I think this is where I come to sort of a faith perspective, and I say to myself, and this actually, I got this from someone at my church. They have a racial justice board, and I did a retreat for them. And this guy said at the retreat, he said, I am really trying to see Buddha in every person that I meet. He said, so if they are, a Trump supporter, I really try to see the Buddha. Like, I know it's in there.
At their core.
I know it's in there.
Before all this was taught to them.
Exactly.
In their core.
It's in there.
Yeah.
And I just have to make myself see that in them. And I thought, that resonated with me. And I think rather than my typical reaction is to try to maybe give them more information.
Yeah.
If you only knew this, you wouldn't think that.
I see that go wrong all the time. That's where ears close.
Let me tell you what I can help you with.
Yeah.
It's just see the Buddha in that person. Let it go. It'll be okay. It'll be okay. Because I do believe that each person has to come to it in their own time and at their own pace.
Kind of like spirituality.
Yes, exactly.
I love that. I'm so grateful for your information and your generosity and your story and this conversation.
Oh, geez. I don't know if I really helped anyone with anything.
I think you did. I'm sitting there in my mind knowing the manifestation formula. I'm like, oh my gosh, anyone listening gets to hear you're so expansive because you really have, you've literally from where what you were exposed to growing up have expanded through every step of the way to get you where you are today. And it actually follows the format so beautifully of what I believe in manifestation. So you've been highly expansive. And I'm going to ask you one more question. Okay. And then I swear we'll wrap it up. What would you have to say to either yourself, if you were to go back to yourself at the youngest age coming into the world, giving them words of wisdom, or to another woman sitting out there today, a Black young woman who may face being a single mother, who may face being the first of her family to go to college. What would you say to her right now?
I want to say, there's so many things I want to say. In fact, I've been thinking, is there if I wrote a book, would anyone read it? I've been thinking that.
I would.
The reason I've been thinking that is the journey of, raising a child as a single mom without support from the father. It's sort of hard to express what goes into that until you're kind of in it and you have to deal with it on your own. So I would say to people going through that, first of all, know that you can get through it. I think you have to look at who do you need around you to help you get through it, right? So for me, being away from my family, that became Rahad's grandmother. That became, and I thought because I was splitting up with her son that she might, diss us, and say, well, I don't want you in it either, But it was the total opposite effect, and she welcomed it, and she just was so happy to get to know Rahad. And then I found just a few other friends of like mind and like spirit who also understood what I was going through, and they were willing to be there for me, just be there for me. Like, take Rahad let him have a sleepover with their son, or, so I could have a break and at least go to the movies or something. Or, my parents used to, in the summer, take Rahad for about 6 weeks in the summer.
Yeah.
My dad called it my break.
Aww.
He said, you need a break. And also, to their credit, they wanted ongoing time with their grandson. He was the first grandchild. And at the time, my sister and my 2 brothers were back in Cleveland, so he got to know his aunt, his uncle, and they all just spoiled him greatly. But I had some family support, even though it was distant. But then I built a Plan B support network right where I was. So I would say surround yourself with like-minded people. I think what also helped me was the faith connection of having a church, which is not so much from the religious perspective, but from the community perspective, because there are people there that you can talk to. I found a great mentor for Rahad that was in the church. He had his own business, and he used to take Rahad on little days off to his office and let him do things. And I remember he would bring him home, and he would say, he and his wife were in the business together, and he would say, boy, he's really a good worker. He said, all I had to buy him today for lunch was a milkshake. And he was perfectly happy to get that milkshake. But, just helping your child have, good relationships with mentors or other friends and family. And it's not going to be a cakewalk. I just have to say that. It's not a cakewalk, but it's doable. It is doable. I think, keeping yourself going, continuing to learn, continuing to try to, do more with your own life, then that becomes both an example for the child, but also you put yourself in different positions. So as I was doing the different jobs, I was always looking at, okay, can I make more money if I do this? And then if I did that and I made more money, then it was like, okay, but I really don't like this. So now I got to find something that I can do that I can make more money, but it's also something that I like. And I guess in some ways there was this really without even knowing that I'm manifesting some of this in my life, it was always seeing a better place for myself. Always in my mind knowing that this is what I want. This is where I want him to be. This is where, and somehow through the flow of energy and nature and, all of that sort of coming together for me. But it wasn't like I read it, okay, now step 1, do this, and then step 2, do this. But it is sort of a process that you have to take yourself through in order to make the way, for your child and for others, around you.
Amazing. Great words of wisdom. I was raised by a single mom. Well, a village too. Very similar to Rahad. Very similar. And I think you summed that up really, really well.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. But this has been so exciting. I'm like, oh, gee, I'm 73. I'm going to do a podcast?
Yes.
I just recently learned what they were.
You're our wisest podcaster yet. I think 73, you're the wisest so far to come on. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So we're super grateful for that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
And we're wishing everybody a wonderful weekend. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into the episode, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, we did. And in case you're not totally ready to join the pathway yet, I wanted to share a few of our free offerings that I'll often suggest to people as a little bit of a blueprint to get them started on their manifestation journey. The first place I like to direct people completely for free is the motivation. You can see it linked below or on our homepage as our testimony library. And it's categorized by different subjects, whether you're calling in career, money, love, wellness, and much more. when you're reading about a member's experience of what they manifested, you're actually seeing to believe and showing your subconscious that that very thing is possible for you. The second place I like to direct people is to the free clarity exercise, which is also linked below. In it, you get to try our own unique hypnosis process, learn about the science, and some journaling prompts. And the best part about this, you'll get a tiny taste of what it's like to go into your hypnotic state, bring your subconscious forward, and create new neural pathways while receiving clarity. And the third thing, if you haven't listened to it on this podcast yet, please go back to the episode titled Manifestation 101, where you'll learn the basics of neural manifestation to truly understand this process. So go ahead and check out those free resources, the motivation, the free clarity exercise, and the episode Manifestation 101, all linked below. And in an effort to make sure to have representation in this process series, go ahead and submit any process testimonials you have, especially to our LGBTQ plus community, our BIPOC, as well as the Ys, which is anyone in the community who is 45 and over. All right, we'll be back next week.